Chapter 10, A Taste of Temptation. The upscale bar in downtown Manhattan was a haven for the rich and powerful, a place where deals were made over glasses of aged whiskey, where laughter and flirtation flowed as freely as the top-shelf liquor. The lights were dim, casting a golden glow on the polished wood and velvet upholstery. It was here that Isabella Achebe found herself tonight, seeking refuge in the darkened corners, trying to drown out the whispers of her past. The weight of the last few months hung heavy on her shoulders. She had been so careful, so disciplined in Nassau County, sculpting herself into a new person, forcing herself to suppress the bloodlust that had defined her existence for so long. But now, she could feel the cracks beginning to form. The hunger was gnawing at her again, clawing at her insides, and the glass of Bordeaux in her hand did little to quell it. She was on her third glass when he approached her. Tall, impeccably dressed, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confidence that came with obscene wealth, the man slid into the seat beside her without waiting for an invitation. His cologne was overpowering, a heady mix of leather and spice that made her stomach churn. "What's a stunning woman like you doing here all alone?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. His eyes roved over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Isabella tilted her head, offering him a practiced smile that hid her inner turmoil. "Just enjoying a quiet evening," she replied, her voice as soft and alluring as honey. The man, who introduced himself as Richard Montgomery, a real estate magnate, was relentless. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear, whispering promises of indulgence, of pleasure beyond her wildest dreams. She could see the hunger in his eyes, the desire to possess, to dominate. In another life, she would have lured him into her trap, taken him to his penthouse suite, and stripped away the arrogant confidence from his eyes before ending him in a symphony of blood and screams. But tonight, as she sat there, nursing her drink, she realized that she was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of the relentless hunger that gnawed at her, tired of being a monster in a beautiful disguise. But Richard was persistent. His hands brushed against her thigh, his fingers tracing patterns over her dress. The touch sent a jolt through her, one part revulsion, one part something darker. The old hunger stirred, whispering that it would be so easy, so delicious, to let herself fall again. "Why don't we take this upstairs?" he whispered, his lips grazing her ear. For a moment, Isabella hesitated. The urge to kill surged, a torrent that threatened to drown her. She could almost see it in her mind, his eyes wide with terror as her knife slid between his ribs, the satisfying crack as bones gave way. It would be so simple, so freeing. But then, something shifted. A flicker of movement in her periphery, a shadow that cut through the haze of her thoughts. "Excuse me, miss. I believe you left this behind." The voice was deep, smooth, with a hint of southern drawl. Isabella turned, her eyes narrowing as they fell upon the figure that had interrupted her dark reverie. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with the rugged, sun-kissed look of someone who spent his life outdoors. He held her purse in one hand, his other resting casually in his pocket. She hadn't even realized she had left it at the bar. "Thank you," she said cautiously, her eyes flicking between him and Richard, who was watching with annoyance. "But I don't believe we've met." "Isaac McNeil," he said, offering her a smile that was both charming and disarming. "Owner of McNeil Trucking. I happened to notice you left your purse behind when you moved to more private company." His eyes flicked briefly to Richard, then back to Isabella, and there was something knowing in his gaze, something that made her pulse quicken. Isaac's presence seemed to change the atmosphere. Richard scowled, but he was clearly unwilling to cause a scene. With a muttered curse, he downed the rest of his drink and stalked away, leaving Isabella and Isaac alone at the bar. "Thank you," Isabella said again, more sincerely this time. "But I don't think I needed rescuing." Isaac raised an eyebrow, his smile never faltering. "Maybe not. But I couldn't help but notice the intensity in your eyes. I've seen that look before." His voice was calm, steady, as if he were discussing the weather. But his eyes, dark, piercing, were locked onto hers with a gaze that felt like it was stripping her bare. "What look is that?" Isabella asked, her tone as cool and controlled as she could manage, though inside she felt a tremor of unease. How much had he seen? How much did he know? "The look of someone who's about to make a very bad decision," he said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The kind of decision that you can't take back." Isabella's fingers tightened around her glass. "You don't know me." "No," Isaac agreed. "But I recognize that darkness. I've seen it in men who've lost everything, who've done things they can't forget. It's a hard thing to shake off." She stared at him, her mind racing. Who was this man? How had he seen through her so easily? For years, she had hidden behind masks, playing roles, deceiving everyone around her. But this stranger, this trucking company owner with his unassuming demeanor, seemed to see right through her. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice a low hiss. Isaac's smile faded, replaced by a look of surprising sincerity. "Because I've been where you are," he said quietly. "Not in the same way, but I've faced my demons too. And I know that once you give in, there's no turning back." Something in his words struck a chord within her. A memory of the blood on her hands, the endless nights where no amount of killing could quiet the screams in her mind. For a moment, she felt the urge to push him away, to tell him to leave her alone. But another part of her, a part she hadn't felt in years, was curious. "What if I've already gone too far?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Isaac's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Isabella felt a flicker of something that wasn't just rage or lust or hunger. It was something dangerously close to hope. "Maybe you have," he said. "But maybe you haven't. The fact that you're still questioning it means you haven't completely lost yourself." Isabella looked down at her hands, at the perfectly manicured nails that had once been stained with blood. Could it be possible? Could she truly change, or was it just another lie she was telling herself? Isaac reached out, placing a warm hand over hers. "Come with me," he said. "Let's get out of here. Let me show you that there's another way." For a long moment, she hesitated. The darkness inside her screamed to be fed, to indulge in one more kill, to savor the ecstasy of taking a life. But as she looked into Isaac's steady gaze, she felt something shift inside her. "All right," she said softly, slipping her hand into his. Together, they left the bar, stepping out into the cool night air. For the first time in years, Isabella felt like she was stepping into something unknown, a future that wasn't soaked in blood. But as she walked beside Isaac, she couldn't help but wonder, could a monster like her ever truly change?